Ambassador David Torres stood alone in the transport chamber, feeling the weight of his species' future pressing down on him like the gravity of a collapsing star. Through the reinforced viewing port, he could see the massive structure of the Galactic Council headquarters growing larger by the second. The station stretched across space for hundreds of kilometers, its biometallic surfaces pulsing with energy signatures from countless alien technologies. This was the beating heart of interstellar civilization, where the fates of 1,000 worlds were decided daily. The transport's computer announced their arrival with a series of melodic tones that somehow managed to sound ominous. Torres adjusted his diplomatic uniform one final time and checked the sealed briefcase handcuffed to his wrist. Inside lay Earth's formal response to the most serious charges ever brought against a member species: unauthorized expansion, technological theft, and violations of 17 different galactic treaties. The charges were true. Every single one of them. The docking procedure completed with mechanical precision, and Torres walked through the airlock into a corridor that seemed to stretch toward infinity. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that shifted and changed as representatives of different species passed by, each requiring specific atmospheric and lighting conditions for optimal function. The diversity was staggering. Crystalline beings that chimed like wind bells as they moved, gaseous entities contained within mobility suits that sparked with internal lightning, creatures that looked like living mathematics, their forms constantly shifting through geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. None of them paid attention to the lone human making his way toward the judgment chamber. To them, he was just another representative from another unremarkable species about to face the consequences of overstepping their boundaries. They had no idea how wrong they were, so the judgment chamber itself defied easy description. It was a sphere within a sphere, the inner surface lined with observation platforms that rose in concentric rings toward a ceiling lost in shadows. At the center hung a platform where defendants were expected to stand and face the assembled authority of galactic civilization. The acoustic design was perfect, ensuring that every word spoken would reach every delegate with crystal clarity. Torres estimated that over 2,000 beings were present, representing species from across the known galaxy. The scale was deliberately intimidating, designed to make anyone standing at the center feel small and powerless. It had probably worked on every species that had ever faced judgment here. It was not going to work on humanity. Chancellor Vex of the Andrillian Confederacy called the session to order with a sound that resembled breaking glass mixed with whale song. The translation systems immediately kicked in, converting his words into the hundreds of languages and communication methods used by the assembled delegates. The charges against the species known as humanity are severe and numerous, Chancellor Vex announced, his crystalline form shifting through colors that indicated deep displeasure. Unauthorized terraforming of 17 worlds, theft of classified technologies from 6 different civilizations, military expansion into restricted zones without proper permits, and most seriously, the establishment of defensive installations in neutral space. Torres listened to the charges with the patience of someone who had heard them many times before. Each accusation was accompanied by holographic evidence showing human colonies on worlds that had been declared off-limits, human ships using technologies that should have been beyond their capabilities, and human military bases in locations that violated ancient territorial agreements. How does the accused species respond to these charges? Chancellor Vex asked, his voice echoing throughout the vast chamber. Torres stepped forward to the speaking platform, placed his briefcase on the small table provided, and looked up at the assembled representatives. 2,000 alien faces stared back at him, some curious, others openly hostile, most simply waiting for the formalities to conclude so they could deliver their predetermined judgment. Honored delegates, Torres began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's amplification systems. Earth acknowledges all charges as stated. A ripple of surprise passed through the assembly. Most species spent days arguing the details of charges brought against them, claiming misunderstandings or jurisdictional disputes. Few had ever simply admitted guilt to such serious violations. However, Torres continued, Earth believes the Council has fundamentally misunderstood the nature of these actions. He opened his briefcase and withdrew what appeared to be a simple metallic cube, no larger than his fist. As he held it up for the assembly to see, several delegates leaned forward in their observation platforms, trying to identify the device. The Council operates under the assumption that humanity requires permission for its activities, Torres said, his tone remaining conversational. This assumption is incorrect. Chancellor Vex's crystalline form flickered with patterns that indicated confusion and growing anger. All species within Council jurisdiction are bound by galactic law. Humanity agreed to these restrictions when you joined the galactic community. Torres smiled, and something about that expression made several of the more perceptive delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. Chancellor Vex, with respect, humanity never agreed to be bound by restrictions we were not consulted in creating. He placed the cube on the platform beside him and stepped back. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the cube began to change, its surface flowing like liquid metal as it expanded and reconfigured itself into increasingly complex patterns. You see? Torres continued as the device continued its transformation. Humanity has a different perspective on authority and permission than most species. We don't believe anyone has the right to tell another intelligent species where they can live, what they can build, or how they can defend themselves. The cube had now become a sphere nearly a meter in diameter, hovering silently above the platform. Its surface was mirror-smooth, reflecting the lights of the chamber back at the assembled delegates. Several security officers moved closer to the platform, their hands moving toward weapons that probably wouldn't work against technology they didn't understand. The 17 worlds we terraformed were uninhabited rocks in systems no one claimed, Torres said, his voice gaining strength. The technologies we supposedly stole were developed independently in our laboratories after studying principles available in any public database. The defensive installations were built in empty space that threatened no one. Chancellor Vex raised one of his crystalline appendages, and security barriers began to descend around the speaking platform. Regardless of your justifications, humanity has violated Council law. The punishment for such violations is severe. The sphere suddenly began to emit a low harmonic tone that seemed to resonate in the bones of every organic being present. The chamber's lighting systems flickered, and several of the more sensitive species began to back away from their observation positions. The problem with Council law, Torres said, his voice somehow carrying clearly over the increasing resonance, is that it assumes the Council has authority over species that never consented to be governed. The sphere's harmonics reached a crescendo, and every electronic system in the chamber began displaying the same message in every known language. Authority requires consent. Consent requires choice. Choice requires freedom. Then the sphere exploded outward, not in fragments or energy, but in pure information. Data streams flowed from its position to every computer terminal, every communication device, every piece of technology in the vast chamber. Within seconds, the assembled delegates found themselves staring at displays showing intelligence reports, technological assessments, and strategic analyses that painted a picture of humanity's capabilities that bore no resemblance to their official records. Hidden colonies numbered in the hundreds, not 17. Military installations that could defend entire sectors. Technologies that operated on principles the Council's best scientists hadn't even theorized. Most disturbing of all were the surveillance reports showing that humanity had been monitoring Council activities for decades, gathering intelligence on every major decision, every secret negotiation, every classified project. How? Chancellor Vex whispered, his crystalline form now showing stress fractures as he processed the scope of what he was seeing. Torres straightened his diplomatic uniform and clasped his hands behind his back. The same way we've done everything else, Chancellor, without asking permission. The information cascade continued for another 30 seconds before cutting off, leaving the chamber's systems flickering back to normal operation. But the damage was done. Every delegate present had seen enough to understand that their fundamental assumptions about humanity's place in the galactic order were catastrophically wrong. You wanted to know how humanity responds to these charges, Torres said into the stunned silence. Here's our response. We reject the premise that the Council has authority over humanity. We reject the idea that we need permission to expand, to build, to defend ourselves, or to exist as we see fit. He gestured toward the displays, still showing fragments of the intelligence data. We've been polite about it for the past century. We've filed the proper forms, attended tea. The emergency session convened 3 hours after Ambassador Torres's dramatic exit. But the Galactic Council chamber felt different now. The atmosphere carried an electric tension that made even the most seasoned diplomats nervous. Where once there had been the comfortable certainty of established order, now there was the unsettling knowledge that everything they thought they knew about galactic politics had been built on false assumptions. Chancellor Vex stood at the center of the inner platform, his crystalline form still showing stress fractures from the earlier information assault. Around him, the assembled delegates whispered in dozens of languages, their conversations creating a susurrus of uncertainty that echoed off the chamber's bioacoustic walls. "Order," Chancellor Vex called, his voice carrying the harmonic frequencies that demanded attention from all present species. "We must address the situation that has developed regarding the human species." Fleet Commander Krall of the Hegemony Defense Force activated his platform's holographic display, showing tactical assessments that his analysts had been frantically compiling since Torres's demonstration. The Hegemony were the Council's primary military arm, responsible for maintaining order across 17 sectors of space. The MI, intelligence data released by the human representative, indicates a level of technological advancement that exceeds our most optimistic projections by several centuries, Krall reported, his tentacled form shifting through colors that indicated extreme agitation. Their stealth capabilities alone suggest they've been operating in Council space undetected for decades. The display showed comparison analyses between known human technology and the capabilities demonstrated in the leaked intelligence. The gap was staggering. Where Council records showed humanity using basic fusion drives, the intelligence reports revealed propulsion systems that could manipulate space-time itself. Where official assessments credited them with crude defensive systems, the leaked data showed weapons platforms that could neutralize entire fleets without firing a single shot. Dr. Yana Solax, the Council's chief xenotechnology analyst, materialized at her station in a shimmer of transported particles. As one of the few individuals capable of processing and understanding technologies from multiple species simultaneously, her assessment would be crucial to the Council's response. "The technological samples included in the information release have been analyzed," she announced, her synthesized voice carrying undertones of professional bewilderment. "The humans haven't just advanced beyond our projections. They've developed along entirely different theoretical frameworks that we didn't know were possible." She activated her own display, showing molecular diagrams and energy patterns that defied conventional understanding. Their computing systems appear to be based on quantum consciousness principles. Their materials science utilizes dimensional folding techniques. Their energy generation methods tap directly into what they call vacuum fluctuations at the subatomic level. Delegate Thane of the Oceanic Worlds raised a sensory appendage, requesting permission to speak. Her species were among the most ancient in the Council, their perspectives shaped by millennia of careful observation and philosophical contemplation. "The question before us is not whether humanity possesses these capabilities," she said, her words carrying the weight of deep consideration. "The data they provided is self-validating. The question is what their possession of such capabilities means for the stability of our civilization." Chancellor Vex's crystalline form flickered through patterns that indicated he was processing multiple probability matrices simultaneously. "Elaborate, Delegate Thane." "A species with the technological capabilities described in their intelligence release could have conquered the known galaxy centuries ago," Thane replied. "The fact that they chose instead to participate in our political processes, to follow our bureaucratic procedures, to seek our permissions for activities they were perfectly capable of accomplishing independently, suggests a level of restraint that is either admirable or terrifying." The implications of that observation settled over the chamber like a toxic cloud. If humanity had been capable of overwhelming the Council for decades but had chosen instead to play by the rules, it meant they had been allowing themselves to be governed by laws they could have ignored at any time. Ambassador Quill of the Trading Consortium activated his platform, his form resembling a collection of geometric shapes that constantly rearranged themselves as he spoke. "Our economic analyses indicate similar patterns. Human trade activities show manipulation of market forces at levels we assumed were impossible. They've been artificially maintaining price stability in 17 different commodity sectors." His display showed economic models that painted a picture of humanity as a hidden stabilizing force in galactic commerce. Where the Council had assumed they were dealing with an emerging economy struggling to compete with established powers, The reality was that humanity had been carefully managing their economic footprint to avoid disrupting existing systems. They could have crashed our entire financial infrastructure decades ago. Quill continued, his geometric forms shifting into configurations that indicated profound unease. Instead, they've been propping it up. Fleet Commander Krall's tactical display updated with new analysis showing military deployments throughout Council space. Red indicators marked the locations of previously undetected human installations, revealing a defensive network that spanned multiple sectors. Their military positioning suggests they've been protecting Council territories from threats we weren't even aware existed, Krall reported, his tentacles writhing in patterns that indicated grudging respect mixed with professional paranoia. These installations are positioned to defend against incursions from outside our local galactic arm. Dr. Solax's technological display shifted to show sensor readings from the outer edge of Council space. Our deep space monitoring stations have been detecting anomalous energy signatures for years. We attributed them to natural phenomena. According to the human intelligence data, they were combat encounters. The chamber fell silent as delegates processed the implications. Humanity hadn't just been hiding their capabilities. They had been using those capabilities to protect the very civilization that was now sitting in judgment of them. How many? Chancellor Vex asked quietly. The data suggests approximately 47 separate incidents over the past 20 years, Dr. Solax replied. Encounters with entities that our current technology would be incapable of detecting, much less defeating. Delegate Mira of the Scientific Coalition stood up from her observation platform, her energy-based form flickering with excitement and apprehension. If humanity has been engaging unknown hostiles in defense of Council space, why did they not report these encounters through proper channels? The question hung in the air until a new voice answered from the chamber's entrance. Ambassador Torres had returned, but he was not alone. Behind him walked 3 other humans, each carrying equipment that radiated power signatures unlike anything in the Council's databases. Because, Delegate Mira, Torres said as he walked back to the central platform, proper channels would have required us to explain technologies you're not ready to understand and threats you're not equipped to handle. Chancellor Vex's crystalline form brightened with patterns that indicated alarm. This session is closed to additional participants. Torres smiled politely. Chancellor, I'm afraid that humanity operates under different rules regarding closed sessions. He gestured to his companions, who began setting up their equipment around the platform. These are Dr. Lisa Park, our xenobiological specialist, Commander Jack Ryan, our dimensional defense coordinator, and Dr. Michael Stone, our temporal mechanics expert. The equipment they deployed created a field of energy that made several delegates' technological systems begin displaying warnings about reality distortions. Within moments, the chamber's entire perception of space and time seemed to shift subtly, as if the laws of physics were becoming more negotiable. We're here to answer your questions about humanity's activities, Torres continued. But first, we need to show you what you've really been asking us to get permission for. Dr. Park activated a device that projected a 3-dimensional map of local galactic space. The familiar star patterns were there, but overlaid with information that transformed everything. Streams of energy connected distant systems, dimensional barriers protected inhabited worlds, temporal monitoring stations watched for chronological anomalies. This is what the galaxy actually looks like, she explained, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had spent years studying realities that most species couldn't perceive. The Council sees systems and trade routes and political boundaries. We see a complex ecosystem of interacting energies, dimensional structures, and temporal flows that require constant management to maintain stability. Commander Ryan's equipment began displaying tactical information that made Fleet Commander Krall's analysis seem primitive by comparison. The entities we've been defending against don't come from our dimension, he said matter-of-factly. They exist in parallel realities and occasionally cross over into our space-time continuum. Your defensive technologies can't even detect them, much less fight them. The Revelation Chamber had been transformed into something unprecedented in the 3,000-year history of the Galactic Council. Where once formal proceedings followed ancient protocols, now desperate representatives huddled in emergency consultations, trying to comprehend the scope of humanity's hidden influence on galactic affairs. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood at the quantum analysis station, her hands moving rapidly across holographic interfaces that displayed data streams no other species could fully comprehend. As the Council's newly appointed liaison for human technology assessment, she faced the overwhelming task of evaluating capabilities that redefined the boundaries of possible science. The dimensional defense network spans 47 star systems, she reported. To the Emergency Analysis Committee, her voice tight with professional strain, each installation requires energy outputs equivalent to a small star, yet they operate without drawing power from any detectable source. Fleet Commander Kral's tactical displays showed overlapping fields of protection that had been invisible to Council sensors for decades. His tentacled form had settled into the deep purple coloration that indicated analytical focus mixed with growing concern. How did our intelligence services miss installations of this magnitude? He demanded of his staff. Some of these structures are larger than space stations, positioned in systems we patrol regularly. Commander Ryan, the human dimensional defense specialist, looked up from his equipment with an expression that might have been sympathetic. Commander, your sensors detect matter and energy operating within standard spacetime parameters. Our installations exist in parallel dimensional states that only intersect with your reality when necessary. To demonstrate, he activated a device that caused a section of the chamber wall to become translucent, revealing a massive structure that occupied the same space as the Council station, but existed in a different dimensional phase. Delegates gasped as they saw the true scale of the facility they were inside, realizing they had been meeting within a human-designed hybrid structure all along. The Council headquarters itself was retrofitted 7 years ago. Ryan continued conversationally. We needed to upgrade your defensive systems after detecting increased dimensional intrusion attempts. Your original structure would have been overrun within months. Chancellor Vex's crystalline form flickered through patterns of confusion and growing alarm. Are you saying that humanity has been modifying Council facilities without authorization? Dr. Stone, the temporal mechanics expert, consulted a device that seemed to display multiple timelines simultaneously. Chancellor, in approximately 60% of timeline variants, unauthorized modifications were the difference between the Council headquarters surviving and being completely destroyed by entities you lack the technology to perceive. The temporal display showed alternate realities, where the Council station had been consumed by dimensional parasites, overrun by quantum entities, or simply ceased to exist as timeline disruptions cascaded through local space. In each scenario, the presence of human modifications was the primary variable that determined survival. Delegate Thane of the Oceanic Worlds raised a sensory appendage, her ancient wisdom providing perspective that younger species lacked. You speak of entities and threats that exist outside our perceptual capabilities. Why have you not shared this knowledge with the Council before now? Dr. Park, the xenobiological specialist, activated her scanning equipment and gestured toward the assembled delegates. Her displays immediately showed biological readings that painted a disturbing picture. Because, Delegate Thane, exposure to knowledge of these entities causes psychological and physiological damage in most species, she explained clinically. Approximately 37% of galactic species experience complete mental breakdown when confronted with evidence of dimensional predators. Another 45% develop permanent cognitive impairments. The scanning data showed stress indicators spiking throughout the chamber as delegates simply listened to the discussion. Several representatives had already begun showing signs of anxiety-induced physiological responses to concepts that challenged their fundamental understanding of reality. The human nervous system, Dr. Park continued, appears to be uniquely adapted to process information about multidimensional threats without suffering permanent damage. We can perceive, analyze, and combat entities that would drive most species insane through mere awareness of their existence. Ambassador Torres moved to the center of the chamber, his bearing calm despite the chaos swirling around him. This is why humanity has maintained operational security regarding our activities. We weren't trying to deceive the Council. We were trying to protect it. Fleet Commander Kral's displays updated with new intelligence showing the scope of threats that had been eliminated without Council knowledge. The data was staggering in its implications. 47 separate incidents he read from his tactical assessment. Entity classifications ranging from dimensional parasites to temporal predators to what you describe as reality viruses. Average engagement duration, 72 hours. Council detection rate, 0%. Dr. Solax, the xenotechnology analyst, had been silent for hours as she processed the technological data provided by the human specialists. When she finally spoke, her synthesized voice carried undertones of professional awe mixed with existential dread. The technologies they've demonstrated operate on principles that our most advanced theoretical models dismissed as impossible, she announced to the chamber. They're not just more advanced than us. They're operating according to different laws of physics. Her displays showed comparative analyses between council science and human achievements. Where galactic civilization had developed along predictable paths of technological evolution, humanity appeared to have leaped across entire categories of scientific understanding. Consciousness-based computing systems that use quantum entanglement of thought patterns, material science that manipulates fundamental forces at the subatomic level, energy generation that taps directly into the zero-point field of space itself. Chancellor Vex stood at the center of the platform, his crystalline form now showing stress fractures that threaten structural integrity. What you're describing suggests that humanity has transcended the normal boundaries of biological evolution. How is this possible? Dr. Park's biological scanners focused on the human representatives, displaying genetic and neurological data that defied conventional understanding. Evolution isn't always gradual, Chancellor. Sometimes environmental pressures create rapid adaptive changes that allow a species to survive threats that would extinct their competitors. Her displays showed human brain scans revealing neural structures that didn't exist in any other known species, complex networks of interconnected consciousness, centers that allowed processing of information across multiple dimensional states simultaneously. Earth experienced dimensional incursions for approximately 50,000 years before humanity developed space travel, she explained. These encounters created evolutionary pressure that selected for consciousness types capable of surviving exposure to extra-dimensional entities. The implications settled over the chamber like a suffocating blanket. Humanity hadn't just accidentally discovered advanced technologies. They had been shaped by encounters with the very threats they now defended against. Delegate Mira of the Scientific Coalition stood up from her observation platform, her energy-based form flickering with excitement and terror. You're saying that humanity evolved specifically to combat these dimensional threats? Commander Ryan nodded grimly. More accurately, Delegate Mira, we are the only species that survived evolution in an environment where these threats were present. The others, he gestured to his dimensional sensors, which showed faint traces of extinct civilizations that had once existed in parallel dimensional states. We found evidence of 17 different sapient species that evolved on Earth across various dimensional phases, he continued. Humanity is the only one that developed the neurological adaptations necessary to perceive and combat extra-dimensional entities while maintaining biological viability. The chamber fell, silent as delegates contemplated the horrifying possibility that their entire galactic civilization existed only because one species had evolved the ability to fight monsters they couldn't even perceive. How many? Chancellor Vex asked quietly. How many threats are there? Dr. Stone consulted his temporal monitoring equipment, which displayed probability cascades across multiple timeline variants. Active threats requiring constant monitoring, approximately 234. Potential threats showing increasing dimensional instability, 807. Dormant threats that could activate under specific conditions, unknown, but estimated in the thousands. Torres looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization, seeing in their faces the growing understanding of how precarious their existence really was. This is why humanity never asked permission for our activities, he said simply. When dimensional parasites start feeding on inhabited worlds, you don't have time to file environmental impact reports. When reality viruses begin spreading through communication networks, you don't wait for committee approval to. The crisis deepened as news of humanity's revelations spread beyond the council chambers. Emergency communications flooded in from across the galaxy as governments, military commands, and scientific institutions struggled to process the implications of what had been disclosed. In the space of 18 hours, the fundamental assumptions governing interstellar relations had been shattered beyond repair. Prime Minister Gorin of the Altarian Republic stood at the emergency communication station, his scaled features showing the deep blue coloration that indicated extreme stress among his species. As leader of one of the Council's most influential member worlds, his response would help determine how the galaxy as a whole reacted to humanity's revelations. The Altarian Defense Force has detected 17 previously unknown installations in our home system, he reported to the emergency assembly, his voice carrying the weight of a leader whose worldview had been fundamentally challenged. All of them are positioned to defend against attack vectors we didn't know existed. His displays showed orbital platforms that had been invisible to Altarian sensors for decades, sophisticated defensive networks that surrounded every major population center, and monitoring stations that tracked dimensional anomalies. The Altarians lacked the technology to detect themselves. According to the data provided by the human representatives, these installations have engaged hostile entities on 43 separate occasions over the past 15 years. Goran continued. We attributed the energy discharges to solar flare activity. Dr. Park stepped forward, her biological scanners showing the psychological stress levels spiking throughout the chamber as delegates confronted the scope of humanity's hidden activities. Prime Minister, your species shows significant neurological vulnerability to dimensional perception, she explained with clinical detachment. Exposure to accurate information about these engagements would have triggered mass psychological trauma across your population. Admiral Zara of the Confederation Navy activated her tactical displays, showing fleet positions throughout Council space. As the military coordinator responsible for maintaining order across 12 sectors, her assessment carried significant weight with the security-focused delegates. Our analysis indicates that human installations have been providing tactical support to Council forces for decades. Without our knowledge, she reported, her voice tight with professional embarrassment. Battle outcomes that we attributed to superior strategy or favorable conditions were actually the result of covert assistance from human dimensional weapons platforms. The tactical displays showed engagement after engagement where Council forces had achieved victories that should have been impossible, given their technological limitations. In each case, careful analysis revealed evidence of external intervention by weapons systems operating on principles the Council military couldn't understand. The Battle of Rigel 7, Admiral Zara continued, highlighting a specific engagement. Our forces defeated a hegemony invasion fleet despite being outnumbered 3-1. We believed our victory was due to innovative tactics and determination. Commander Ryan consulted his dimensional monitoring equipment, which showed energy signatures from that battle that had been invisible to Council sensors. Admiral, your forces showed remarkable courage during that engagement. However, the enemy fleet was simultaneously fighting dimensional parasites that had infected their command systems. Without that secondary conflict, your forces would have been overwhelmed in approximately 47 minutes. The revelation sent shockwaves through the military representatives present. One of the Council's most celebrated victories had been possible only because humanity had been secretly fighting the same enemies from a different dimensional perspective. Chancellor Vex's crystalline form continued to show stress fractures as he processed report after report revealing the scope of humanity's hidden influence. How many Council decisions have been influenced by your interventions? Dr. Stone activated his temporal monitoring systems, displaying probability matrices that showed the cascade effects of various historical decisions. Chancellor, direct intervention in Council political processes violates our operational protocols. However, our activities against dimensional threats have inevitably influenced the conditions under which those decisions were made. The temporal displays showed timeline analysis stretching back 50 years, revealing how humanity's defensive activities had shaped the environment in which galactic civilization had developed. Trade routes that remained stable because dimensional parasites were eliminated before they could disrupt commerce. Scientific discoveries that were possible because reality viruses were neutralized before they could corrupt research data. Diplomatic negotiations that succeeded because temporal predators were prevented from creating causality loops that would have derailed peace talks. We estimate that approximately 73% of major Council decisions over the past half-century were made in contexts that would have been significantly different without our protective activities. Dr. Stone reported matter-of-factly. However, the actual decision-making processes remained entirely under Council control. Delegate Yaren of the Technological Consortium raised a mechanical appendage, his cybernetic form flickering with data streams as he processed the implications for galactic technology development. The technological advancement rates across all council species have been accelerating beyond predicted parameters for decades. We attributed this to natural scientific evolution. Dr. Solax activated her xenotechnology analysis systems, showing comparative development curves that painted a disturbing picture. The acceleration began approximately 37 years ago and has been consistently above projected rates across all major technological categories. Ambassador Torres moved to address this concern directly. The consortium is correct that technological advancement has been artificially accelerated. However, this acceleration was necessary to prepare council species for threats that your natural development pace would not have equipped you to handle in time. His explanation was accompanied by projections showing what would have happened if galactic civilization had continued developing at its natural pace. The models were grim, showing dimensional incursions overwhelming unprepared civilizations, reality viruses corrupting entire technological infrastructures, and temporal predators creating causality loops that would have trapped entire star systems in recursive time distortions. We've been providing subtle technological guidance through carefully placed research data, inspiration for critical discoveries, and elimination of dead-end development paths that would have wasted crucial time, Torres continued. Without this guidance, the Council would have required approximately 300 additional years to develop defensive capabilities, adequate for the current threat environment. Fleet Commander Krall's tactical analysis showed the military implications of this technological acceleration. Our defensive capabilities have improved dramatically over the past 3 decades. We attributed this to lessons learned from border conflicts and improved cooperation between member species. Commander Ryan nodded grimly. Commander, every major military advancement in council space over the past 30 years was based on principles we introduced through carefully managed technology transfers. Your plasma defense grids, quantum communication networks, and dimensional detection systems are all based on simplified versions of human technologies. The realization that their technological progress had been artificially guided sent waves of uncertainty through the scientific and military representatives. Everything they had thought they had achieved through their own efforts was revealed to be the result of careful manipulation by a species they had considered their equals. Dr. Vasquez stood at her analysis station, her hands trembling as she processed data that challenged every assumption about scientific development. The implications for our understanding of technological evolution are staggering. If human intervention has been accelerating our development for decades, how do we determine what we're actually capable of achieving independently? Torres' expression grew thoughtful as he considered the question. Dr. Vasquez, that's exactly the right question to ask. And it's why we believe the time for hidden guidance has ended. He gestured to his colleagues, who began activating equipment that filled the chamber with displays showing humanity's complete technological database. The scope was overwhelming, representing scientific achievements that spanned centuries of accelerated development driven by constant contact with extra-dimensional threats. We're offering to share our complete technological database with all council species, Torres announced. Not gradually, not through carefully managed transfers, but completely and immediately. The offer sent shockwaves through the assembly. Access to humanity's full technological capabilities would advance galactic civilization by centuries, virtually overnight. But it would also expose every species to knowledge that could fundamentally alter their understanding of reality. There are risks, Torres continued. Exposure to some technologies requires psychological preparation that most species haven't undergone. Some discoveries will challenge fundamental beliefs about the nature of. The final vote approached as delegates from across the galaxy grappled with the most momentous decision in the history of interstellar civilization. The chamber had been reconfigured to accommodate representatives from species that had never before participated in council proceedings, including entities that existed primarily as energy patterns, consciousness collectives that spanned multiple dimensions, and beings whose very presence required reality stabilization fields to prevent space-time distortions. Chancellor Vex stood at the center of the transformed chamber, his crystalline form now stabilized but bearing permanent fracture patterns that served as a reminder of how fundamentally everything had changed. Around him, the assembled representatives of galactic civilization prepared to determine whether They would accept the full truth about their existence and the responsibilities that came with it. The proposal. Before this assembly is unprecedented, Chancellor Vex announced. His words translated simultaneously into consciousness patterns that could be understood by beings whose thought processes operated beyond conventional language. Humanity offers complete technological integration, full disclosure of extra-dimensional threats, and partnership in defending our reality matrix against entities that most of us cannot even perceive. The scope of the proposal was staggering. Humanity wasn't just offering to share their advanced technologies. They were proposing to transform galactic civilization into something capable of surviving in a universe far more dangerous and complex than anyone had imagined. Dr. Park activated her biological monitoring systems, displaying real-time stress indicators for every species present. The psychological pressure of confronting ultimate reality was pushing several delegations to the edge of their cognitive capacity. The neurological impact assessments are complete, she reported to the assembly. 43 species present show acceptable adaptation rates to extra-dimensional awareness. 27 species will require graduated exposure protocols to prevent psychological trauma. 12 species demonstrate natural immunity to dimensional perception stress. Her displays show detailed analysis of how different consciousness types responded to knowledge of the threats humanity had been fighting. Some species, like the energy-based Etherians, showed remarkable resilience when confronted with extra-dimensional concepts. Others, particularly those with rigid neural structures, experienced severe cognitive strain when forced to process information that challenged their fundamental understanding of reality. Commander Ryan stood beside equipment that provided real-time monitoring of dimensional stability throughout the galaxy. His instruments showed increased activity levels among the entities that humanity had been holding at bay, suggesting that the very act of discussing these threats openly was drawing unwanted attention. The dimensional parasites are responding to the consciousness resonance patterns created by this assembly, he reported with clinical detachment. Large gatherings of aware beings create psychic signatures that attract predators operating in parallel dimensional states. His warning was punctuated by alerts from monitoring stations throughout the galaxy as dimensional barriers showed signs of stress. The very discussion of extra-dimensional threats was beginning to weaken the protective systems that kept them at bay. Fleet Commander Krall's tactical displays updated, with alerts from defense installations across 17 sectors. We're detecting increased dimensional incursion attempts at 14 separate locations. Whatever we decide here, we need to decide quickly. Ambassador Torres moved to the center of the chamber, his bearing calm despite the growing evidence that time was running out. The entities we've been protecting you from are drawn to gatherings of awakened consciousness. This assembly represents the largest concentration of aware beings in galactic history. He gestured toward Commander Ryan's monitoring equipment, which showed dimensional barriers fluctuating under pressure from entities that existed in the spaces between realities. We estimate approximately 6 hours before the first barriers fail and direct incursions begin. After that point, exposure to these entities will no longer be a matter of choice. The time pressure added urgency to a decision that would have been difficult under the best circumstances. Delegates who had spent their careers in careful deliberation now faced the necessity of making choices that would determine the survival of their civilizations within hours rather than years. Delegate Thane of the Oceanic World spoke for the faction, favoring acceptance of humanity's proposal. The evidence presented demonstrates that our current state of ignorance is not sustainable. Whether we vote to accept full disclosure or not, the threats we've been protected from will soon become impossible to hide. Her ancient wisdom carried weight with the more conservative delegations, who had initially resisted any change to established order. The choice is not between safety and danger. The choice is between facing danger with the tools to survive or facing it helplessly. Prime Minister Gorin represented the opposition faction, arguing for a more gradual approach to the revelations humanity offered. The psychological impact of full disclosure could destroy our civilizations more effectively than any external threat. Perhaps we should consider a slower integration process. Dr. Stone consulted his temporal monitoring equipment, which displayed probability cascades showing the outcomes of various decision timelines. Prime Minister, our models indicate that graduated exposure Protocols increase survival rates for individual species, but significantly reduce overall galactic survival probability. His temporal displays showed alternate timelines, where partial disclosure created confusion and inadequate responses during critical moments. Species that receive incomplete information make decisions based on flawed understanding of the threat environment. The cumulative effect reduces coordinated defense effectiveness by approximately 73%. The mathematical reality was stark. Either galactic civilization accepted the full truth and the responsibilities that came with it, or they faced extinction from threats they were not equipped to understand or combat. Admiral Zara activated emergency communication channels, showing real-time reports from military installations throughout Council space. Defensive positions are reporting contact with entities that don't appear on our sensors. Our weapons are having no effect on targets our technology cannot properly detect. The dimensional incursions had begun ahead of schedule, forced by the consciousness resonance created by the assembly itself. Across the galaxy, Council forces found themselves engaging enemies they could barely perceive using weapons that might as well have been throwing rocks. The barriers are failing faster than projected, Commander Ryan reported. His dimensional monitoring equipment showing cascade failures throughout the protective network. We have approximately 90 minutes before the incursions become irreversible. Ambassador Torres looked around the chamber at representatives of civilizations that had spent millennia building their understanding of the universe on foundations that were crumbling before their eyes. The vote can no longer be about whether to accept partnership with humanity, he said simply. The vote is now about whether to accept the tools necessary for survival. Dr. Park's biological monitors showed stress levels approaching critical thresholds across multiple species as the reality of their situation became undeniable. Psychological adaptation to crisis situations shows significant improvement when individuals have agency in determining their response. The act of choosing survival tools rather than having them imposed reduces trauma significantly. The scientific evidence supported what Torres was advocating, giving the assembled civilizations the chance to choose their fate rather than having it forced upon them by circumstances would improve their chances of psychological survival. Chancellor Vex stepped forward, his crystalline form now resonating with harmonics that indicated resolve rather than uncertainty. All delegations have heard the evidence. All representatives understand the stakes. The vote will proceed immediately. The voting process itself was unlike anything in Council history. Instead of the formal procedures and lengthy debate periods that had characterized galactic politics for millennia, the vote was conducted through direct consciousness interface, allowing instant communication of complex decisions across the diverse assembly. The result was unanimous, but not because every species enthusiastically embraced the proposal. The vote was unanimous because the alternative was extinction, and even the most conservative civilizations possessed survival instincts that superseded their preference for gradual change. As the vote concluded, humanity's representatives immediately began activating systems that had been prepared for this moment. Advanced technologies flooded into Council databases. Defensive protocols were transmitted to military installations throughout the galaxy, and consciousness enhancement systems began the careful process of expanding the perceptual capabilities of species that had agreed to see reality as it truly was. The transformation was immediate and overwhelming. Across the galaxy, civilizations that had existed in comfortable ignorance suddenly found themselves able to perceive threats they had never imagined.